Awesome. Okay, yeah, we'll get started. So, hello everyone, my name's Adam Mcmurchie. Thank you for having me. Today we're going to talk a little bit about open source as a culture, part 2. Don't worry if you've missed part 1. That was really, it was just really me talking about how I'd managed to sort of leverage open source personally in my career to get to where I am. So I was a bricklayer originally, and then I was working in the factory floors, and now I'm the head of data and the head of cloud in NatWest, and I've been at some of the biggest banks in the UK and in the world. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, then definitely check out. It's on YouTube. It's also part of this Finos session from a couple of years ago. So if that's your kind of thing, definitely give it a go. But today, and there's a nice video for you to watch while I talk and do the spiel. But today I'm going to be building on that into 2 parts, right? So this is I wasn't sure what the audience background was going to be, so I kind of tried to hit it down the middle. And so the first part is going to be me sort of discussing values and ideas and frameworks that I think will be useful in underpinning a more healthy and productive open source collaboration. I'll also contrast that with a bit of scaremongering. So I'll also, because why not? And I'll show some sort of dystopian alternatives and how bad things could get if we don't, herd those cats. And then the second part will be a lot more relaxed and informal as we sort of dive through some open source repositories, and I'll show you some cool things, and I'll say, look, here's some cool tools, and we can talk through some, so it's kind of like open source archaeology, because I'm going to be digging down and pulling out some repos that you probably haven't heard of, and we'll look through some of those gems. And as you can see, I'm quite a busy person, so this is like me 2 years ago. I'm usually in the top 100 GitHub contributors globally every year. Depending on how you frame it, it's just because I'm really, really busy. I'll do things like I'll build AI bots, I build software for helping disabled and accessibility stuff, social media analytics, I'll build, what else do I do? Build games. And so yeah, I'm kind of active, and if there's anything that you're interested in or you're like, oh, it's a good idea, then tell me, and I'd be more than happy to join your crew. And if you want to join my crew, you can join my crew, right? So simple as that. I make no excuses for talking 100 miles per hour, simply because I've got a lot of content to cover, and I'm breaking this into 2 parts. Don't feel like I'm trying not to condescend people here, because I realize that there's maybe more of a technical lean, but these are just things that matter to me. And I think I hope they'll resonate with you, and maybe some of these points will be useful going down the line and be value add. Last, shameless self-plug, so this is what I'm working on at the moment, so you can think of it as like Alexa on steroids. So it'll code with you, but not like GitHub Copilot. It'll actually code with you in flight and be a kind of mentor. It'll also manage your stocks. It does now. So it manages your stocks, crypto, it does a bit of PA work, so pick up your emails. Its personality imprints on you over time. So that's the idea, and that will be launched soon. So I guess it kind of begs the question, right? Which is what's this techie guy doing talking about culture? What? It doesn't kind of make sense initially, but if you kind of step back, one of the reasons that brought me into this was, see if we kind of think of the formal definition of literacy, right? It's like reading, writing, listening, and speaking comprehension if you include sign language. But we don't really kind of include being able to go online, or to use Word or Excel, but it is part of the bare minimum standard. Now you could imagine in an alternate reality. So you could imagine another world where coding becomes predominant among the masses, maybe with some kind of low code or no code. But regardless, the prophecy that was made 30 years ago or 40 years ago about software eating the world has come true. What they didn't predict was the impact that open source would have across that. So if you just think of everything that I just said as layers in a cake, well, open source is kind of like the fudge that bonds them together. So to kind of hit this home, so the first slide is, if you've not guessed already, I'm kind of trying to say open source affects all of us, right? And this guy here, Alex, he's kind of my hero. And I'm quite happy, he actually responded to me yesterday. So he's a big influencer in the space, and he creates music for games, and he's got millions of followers, and he's got top CEOs from Japanese game makers trying to get him to promote their products. He's got musicians saying what plugins is he using? Is he using GarageBand? Is he using voice synths? Is he creating his own music software? And then you've got devs saying like, hey, Alex, could you like tell us the problems that you've got? Because we don't know what the customers are struggling with and what are the next features that we can roll out. So in a way though, we are all Alex in some sense because we're all doing something and that something allows us to cross-pollinate. We might not be leaders in the field, but we're interacting with other people and generally software is the touch point that happens at. So you could think of it as like artists will use like CAD software. Electricians, I saw an electrician on the road like 2 days ago and he had his laptop out and he's running like PowerFlow algorithms, right? And I could recognize in the VS Code, like it's clearly open source, right? And so there's butchers, bakers, recruiters using recruitment software, architects and so on. And even if that software just happens to just be accounting software, it's increasing in scope. And so the first slide is it affects all of us. The second slide is it's not just techie stuff. It's not just coding, right? So if you go to opensource.com, they make it quite clear that this idea of it being as like open source code is an outdated definition, right? So that is a definition maybe 10 years ago. And you can exemplify that because if you just go to Tesla or Microsoft or Google or any of the big ones and you look at their project repos, be it on GitHub or on their own personal stuff, you'll find that like the code is just one facet, right? So they'll have like mocks, they'll have like UX design, customer journey, accounting, auditing, compliance, legal, the whole shebang. And so really my point there is it affects all of us. Not only does it affect all of us, it's not just code and it's growing. However, here's the problem, the first problem I want to throw out. See, I was a bricklayer, right? And obviously when I got taught by my boss, there were some things that you just wouldn't do. I wouldn't just go and kick down a wall from my colleague because he pissed me off, right? Like you just wouldn't do that. In coding or in open source, I wouldn't just go and steal someone's project and then pass it off as my own. But people do that. I wouldn't just go and like rip off somebody's Git commits, like literally sabotage a Git commit because it made my work look bad. But people do that. And so there's a lot of toxic, what we might consider like separate people might consider as like really bad heat in the open source community. But there's no legislation, there's no guidelines to say you can't steal. Like there's no enforcement of that. The community has to enforce that. And don't worry, I'm not going to try and propose a solution today. I'm not naive enough to say, haha, here we go. But it is something I want to keep in the back of the mind as I try to propose a partial solution. If this gets too much for you, right? If there's just like, dude, this open source stuff is going over my head. Remember OSS Watch, right? You can call them. They've got helplines. They'll give you guidance and advice for like what is open source, how your project can integrate it. So they're a free service. They tweet a lot. There's a British equivalent as well. So, and you can catch me after. Like if you're just like you're just not keeping up or you're like, it's not resonating with you. There are other platforms out there that are like non-profits to help you make the best of your project in open source. Now, the final thing before we sort of get quite deep is you might feel that I might go off on a tangent at times. And what I want to say is there's no detective work required. One of the implicit assumptions that I've got is, and I think more experienced developers and engineers will see this, is sometimes in the result of a product or the result of code, you can infer the quality and the value and the culture that went into making that. So a really simple example is if we had a project that had 15 people and it was like just commit by Dave, Susu, Dave, you might think that, maybe there's a bit of dodgy culture there, right? And it could be that they're hoarding knowledge, or it could be that there's some sort of techno babble and they're like throwing people off into like dead ends, or alternatively they just could be bullying, right? It could be that like those two are made to do the work. We don't know exactly what it could be, but in a sense there's kind of a code smell there at a higher level. Like you can smell something's not right. And so whilst that example might not be perfect, I kind of just need you to have that in the mind, because this is, and I promise this is the last depressing thing that I'll say, at least for the next 5 minutes anyway. I found myself when I was building these slides, because I'm trying to build a story here, and that's why I mentioned the detective work, because I am going to tie the bow as neatly as I can at the end of the first half and bring this all together. But I found myself, I was getting to the point where I was like, look, IT industry, bad, look at all this bad stuff that's going on. And that's not what I want to do, but I do want to just raise awareness of like how things are going and how the open source industry is affected. So there is a little bit, this will be my only slide and then we'll move directly onto solutions. So there's a little bit of let's just look at the state of IT. And I'm not picking on any specific company or any specific person except these three, right? So obviously, right? But they can take it, right? And I'm not picking out any specific industry either. So when I say the IT industry, I'm meaning like HR, BAs, project managers, developers, everybody's impacted. So from the research that I did, what I found out was, and you can see this, I've got notes at the end, and these slides will be available for you to take home, is 40% of all IT staff in the UK and America changed their roles from 2020 to 2021. That's massive. And one of the reasons was because of like short-sighted reactionary moves to the downturns. So you can actually map the hiring count and the firings to the actual dips in the GDP. And so what we found was like in the second dip is where the biggest head cut came, but that's when things were improving. What happened was because profit lags the reality, right? So in the first step, it's like, oh, we just hold fire and just keep those we freeze headcount, but keep those projects coming in, keep those projects ticking over. But when the second dip came, they'd felt the bite from the first dip. And that's when, companies were slashing 50% of their staff across the world. It's not just America and the UK, it's across the world. And the problem that I had was, it was the thinking behind it, that it wasn't like, okay, we've got a situation we need to save the company. It was things like, we can patch 50% of our staff loss with automation and like vendor tooling, right? But one of the worst things that I've seen in smaller fintech startups is that, and this is the first thing that I need to attack, is this 10x developer myth. It's a myth, right? Because when small companies fire 5 people and hire one person, one dev, because they can write 10 times the code as somebody else, every time rubber meets the road, that fails. And it fails because you might be able to write code of like as much as 3 people or 4 people, but it doesn't mean you can do the job of 3 or 4 people. There's a very big difference. So ultimately what we found was, and this was open source research, is that companies were calling people up that they fired 9 months ago. And they were being like, hey, how's it going? Remember me? Hey, look, do you want to come and work for us? And people were like, take a hike. Now, Elon Musk was no different. So he did this kind of thing in 2016 where the company they were like struggling to retain profit because they had to roll out enough cars to meet their targets. And he wanted to automate the entire plant, right? And so the common theme that you're going to see here is treating humans like cattle. So you probably guessed it by now. But what he did was he fired a large proportion of their staff and then tried to like automate that with arms, mechanical arms he'd brought in from Japan and Germany. What happened was these arms started flying all over the place because they warned him and they said, look, it only operates at 100%. And he's like, no, we can zip them up to 130%. I'm a physicist, I know what I'm talking about. And there's actually YouTube videos you can see in the plant where the arms are swinging around and like knocking people out. So what happened was they realized they were about to default on their credits. So they got back on the phones and calling those people back up to the plant. So it was a massive human achievement of just people just flooding into the factory. But they did it because of the brand name. People would say yes. So that was the result of, it resulted in they met their targets they paid off their debitors, and it resulted in him tweeting, humans are underrated. And you kind of feel like saying, yeah, because you underrated them. Right? So that's the point there. So if we expand this kind of quickly, if you take the Dieselgate example, so does anybody know what the Dieselgate is? The Dieselgate scandal. Do you know this guy on the left? On the far left? Does anybody know him?
Head of Volkswagen.
Head of Volkswagen. He went up on court. So this was when the Volkswagen cars had this dodgy software and it was like lying about emissions, and it was like saying like, oh, the emissions are like this low, but they were actually this high. So he went into court and he basically pointed out 2 devs and he said, oh, it was their fault. It's not my problem. I didn't know about this. They did jail time, right, of the latest news that I've heard, right? So please correct me if I'm wrong, but the latest information that we can get, my team can get, is that they did jail time and they remain anonymous, but they may have got out because later on it was found that he was complicit. So anybody that's C-suite, right, you know that one of the reasons we get paid a lot of money is because we're supposed to protect our staff and we're supposed to take responsibility for what we do. However, to reframe this, you could say, well, if that was open source, it would never have happened, right? Like if that code was open and people could look at that, it would never, the merge request would have never happened. However, that's not the case. It's true in this example that if that was open source, it would never have happened. But if you go open source, you just move the bottleneck of the problem. So does anybody know the guy on the right? I'd be quite interested to see if anybody knows him. You know him? Right, so that's Siraj Raval. He was one of the first major plagiarizers 10 years ago. I lost 500 quid to this guy. So people were paying him lots of money to do projects, right? They were like, he was saying, I'm going to teach you AI. I've got a PhD, I'm a leader in the field. But soon, when I say soon, it took 5 years for the open source community to stamp him down. And it took a large collaboration because we're like herding cats. It took us a while to react. And so the point is there's a fine needle to thread between allowing us to just go with the industry and then just pretending everything's utopian and going in open source. Because ultimately, this kind of tech crunch that I'm alluding to, like, are you really surprised that these people would be the benefactors? Like cheats, crooks, and liars? Like, it's not a surprise. But the thing is, we need to figure out how we're going to solve this. And this is where, I think this is where the first major solution comes in. So scaremongering over, done now, right? So we're now moving on to the cool stuff. If you don't know Simon Sinek, check his stuff out. I could never do this justice, so I'm just going to try and paraphrase what he says. And I think this is great. So my earlier point is I worry that we would have this divide of elitists and then the rest of us. Because as more people flood into the IT industry, and if the performance of open source, so maybe I should just tie that. The reason I did that previous slide is because there's clear metrics that the quality of code in open source has dropped. Because people are like worried they're going to lose their job. Like if people are worried they're going to get bite the bullet, they're going to be less likely to share their ideas with other people, and that's what we see, right? So it's like hit the industry, the open source industry, back 40 years for tech hoarding. So I want to make that point. So elitists obviously would take advantage of that. And so if we're really going to talk about the best, let's talk about the best. So Simon Sinek, he went to the Navy SEALs and he said, like, you guys are the best of the best of the best, but I thought you'd all have like tattoos and be like 6 foot and butch and everything. Like, that's not what I'm seeing. So how do you screen high quality? Now, the secret is that they actually have deep inner reserves of strength, right? That's the secret. But they drew him a graph. And he said, on one side, we have performance. On the y-axis, on the other side, we have trust. Now, everybody wants a high performer, high trust. Nobody wants the low performer, low trust, of course. But what happens is the high performers, the top performers, top trust, they're the unicorns. They're like your 2%, you're maybe 2 or 3 of them. So in business and in IT in general, we're more likely, almost always happy to settle for lower trust, but to keep those top performers for those instant gains. You know, you could rephrase this and say, you know, go into any office and say, point out who's the asshole, and everyone will point to the same person, right? Now, it's true, right? Like, it's like, you know, we all know people that are really good at what they do, but they're just not great people. And so what the Navy SEALs does is they took a counterintuitive approach. What they did was they said, look, we would rather take a hit on performance. It's a relative scale, right? So rather than being 99.9% amazing, you're 99.8% amazing. But they'd rather maintain that high level of trust. So the way that they kind of put that is, it's like they say, like, I'd trust you with my life, but would I trust you with my money and my wife, right? And so how does that translate? Like, how does that fall back? To be clear, the Biden administration and the Trump administration take advice from these people, right? And including things such as like OSN frameworks and stuff. So they say it's between performance on the battlefield and performance off the battlefield. That's hard skills versus your soft skills, right? So you're on the battlefields of stuff like your sales made. Did you hit your quarterlies? Like, how many features did you roll out? How many bugs did you fix, right? Whereas your performance off the battlefield are things such as like, is this person actually committed? Are they bought into the vision? Like, are they espousing anti-rockstar rhetoric? You know, is this the kind of person that they are? Now, the thing is, here's the thing. We have 101 metrics for the stuff on this side, on the performance on the battlefield for the hard skills. We have 0 to negligible metrics for the stuff on the right. Now, I always get pulled up on stuff like this where people say, well, when I screen and I do my interviews, I make sure they're a culture fit. It's like, yeah, but do you continuously evaluate that? Do you include that into the metrics of success? Like when you do your annual performance, are these the things that actually matter, or is it actually the sales? Is it actually the products that roll out? Now, here's the thing, and here's my realization, and this is why. So this is one thing that Simon Sinek missed. If you squint hard enough, the stuff on the right is the same as the stuff on the left. The difference is the stuff on the left are your near-term rewards. That's your instant rewards. The stuff on your right are long-term predictors of company growth, right? Because if you have an amazing developer but has really poor values, they'll drop your company the minute that the chips are down or they get a better offer. But if you have like an okay developer, but they're like really committed, then just give them 4 or 5 months and then they'll be awesome, right? And so you want to give those people the ball. And so this is a kind of a thing that I think we kind of need to keep in our mind as we move forward. So as I'm going to round up the first part, right? You might be kind of saying like, whoa, hold on, Adam, like, are you telling me like we to like tear down capitalism or something? Or like, you know, attack like the big companies? Is like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Like, please no. What I'm saying is like, and also that'd be counterproductive, is like we should redefine how quality is perceived, right? So like you're all great in your field, or you all do something in your field that like you're doing your thing. The people who pull the purse strings or the people who pull the direction of the company, they look to you for guidance on like, okay, is that techie good, or is this the right thing that we should be doing? What I'm saying is, back to that investigation slide, is we need to expand how we perceive quality to include those values that I talked about. So here's some examples, starters of 10 that I came up with. So you could fail lone wolf builds, right? So in coding, you could have in your automation harness as part of your Bitbucket quality metrics, you could say, if it's just Adam all the time, you could fail it after 10 commits to say, oh, hold on, this is a culture risk and it's an integrity breach, right? Because if I'm just committing all the time and nobody else is, like, what happens if I get hit by a bus or there's a handover and I fail the handover? Like, literally, can anybody say that they've ever been part of a beautiful, glorious handover? I doubt it, right? You could expand TDD, test-driven development, to include a thing such as called EDD, right? This is a term I coined of education-driven development. As I write out my functions or my classes, or if I'm a UX designer, as I'm doing my abstract or my Figma, what I should be doing is I should be tagging where I got this knowledge resource from. TDD is really hard. EDD is easy, right? Like you just tag the resources, tag the URL or whatever. And it's good because it helps you in your mind remember where you learned the things from. So like if I do a Lambda function, or if I do like a React use effect hook, I should probably be tagging the knowledge resource. Because as we know, I'm hoping everybody agrees that if you've ever been given a handover, the notes are never enough and the README is never enough, right? Like it's just, you're always just like, what? So in this case, you would have you could think of it as a knowledge tree that accompanies the README. And it's so easy to integrate. You could then expand that to MDD, mentor-driven development. So Reg taught me a lot. He was actually my mentor. He was really a large part responsible for where I am today. If I'm writing something, maybe like a JCL or a proc or something, I should probably tag Reg. And then what you could have is you'd have your knowledge tree and your knowledge holder tree. And together, these things might make a better handover. So if you imagine like the Apollo rocket or the pyramids, the reason that we can't build them again is that even though we have the schematics, we don't have that core knowledge. The Apollo rockets was basically just contractors, and the contractors were working with notes, and they just threw away the notes. So like they knew like this part fit into this part, but that knowledge wasn't retained. So that's the end of the first part. So the part I just kind of want to get across there is there may be some more senior devs out here that say to me, aha, Adam, you're just talking about the T-shaped engineer and following agile practices. And yes, yeah, I am. I'm repackaging an older idea, but I'm expanding on it to include metrics, to include these things that we think of as fluffy. I guess what I want to end this first part on is soft skills and the qualities that we consider as being like fluffy should be non-negotiable in terms of physical, practical builds. Okay, second part. This is the more relaxed part. So, Destress, right? So now this is the fun stuff. So James, unfortunately, James McLeod isn't here. Hi, James. He and I had this brainstorming session, and James, we were like talking like, one of the problems of like herding cats is there are just so many different people that are like specialized in different stuff. And James kind of came up, maybe we should have like an interface or a wrapper to like, just like, rather than reinventing the wheel, let's just bring people together. And so I went and built that like a couple of weeks ago or a week ago. And so this is an example of what it might look like. So I call it Pivot OS because it's open source and it pivots to your discipline. So if you're like a musician, then you would get the filters and things relevant to you, including the sources would pivot to you. Renewable energy person, somebody working in the NHS, for example. Now, obviously, I'm not just changing the background there. Like there's tabs and stuff, and there's like filters and things in the background, and there's back-end stuff. But this is what an example of what that might look like. So you can imagine like Adam's a business guy, and he's got business pivot. I'm not a business guy, but if I was, it might look like this. And so on the left, I'd have like topics and repos, like not just news and not just projects, but both that would pivot to my preference. So for example, Lauren Wang here might say, okay, I finished my project and I should just be able to click on that. Now remember, this isn't on this platform. She might have built it out in GitHub, or she might have done it in Bitbucket, or maybe our own open source platform. And this should pull in that data and you should be able to work on it in app. So this is not my baby. I don't want it to be my baby. I'd like you to join on this if you find it interesting. I'm more than happy to give it to you to pick up. But I think it's some way that we could bring the community together and work on that. Okay, does anybody know, like, does anybody recognize this picture? Does this ring? Hands up. That's quite worrying. I'm glad that we've got some, but this is like one of the biggest news in science in recent years. So that's a photo of a black hole. And when I was doing physics at university, that was theoretical, right? So like, it was just, we said you couldn't take a picture of a black hole because you need a telescope the size of Earth to do that. But what these amazing people did was they built a lot of software to stitch together telemetry from all of the telescopes around the Earth, which captured the same amount of space, and we got our first picture. I cannot understate what a massive achievement this is in open source. This is by far one of the biggest. However, it's not without its controversy, as some of you may know. So the lead, she got attacked saying, oh, she's taken all of the glory, and people might say, Adam, you should also attack her if you're anti-elitist. But she never claimed that. She went on TED and said, look, it's a team effort. And by the way, 0.26% of code that 5,000 people worked on, that's a lot of code. Yeah, that's non-trivial, right? So it does hark back to earlier times when IT was dominated by, it was reversed. So women dominated all of the core disciplines, at least in the sciences. And again, Margaret Hamilton, she got the same amount of stick. Again, she said it was a team effort. The thing I just want to encourage here is whilst I picked on those three people, that's a different situation. I was personally affected by that. And also, these are things that people went to court for. In this case, these are people that are just working. They had no horse in the race. And they constantly pointed out that they were just, part of the team. It's the media representation. And this is the thing you need to be prepared for. As more open source projects, because as the gentleman pointed to earlier, is going to just balloon, right? And it's going to be really evident that open source is going to dominate traditional closed source. We need to reserve judgment based upon media representation of the sciences. So, team effort, right? But I'm sure if any of you can just look at those people, they're not apprentices, right? They're leads, right? So that's not the team. That's the team leads, yeah? So even that's not the team. And so I just want to mention that. But the reason I opened up with this one in the second part is because the source code came out last month, right? So this is amazing. So you can see there's only like 1 star, and I think that's like me. So it's like, but the thing is, you can now get that data, and you can now play about with black hole data, and the software's open. Now, does anybody know NumPy? Of course, NumPy wanted to get on this, and they were like, hey, our tool was used, don't forget about us. Bear in mind, this was front page news around the world. So it was awesome, and NumPy were part of it. They did a lot of the array manipulation, so it was awesome. But it harks back to one of the founder of open source projects, at least in my mind, especially in the science domain. So SETI at home, when the internet was just coming into its own in '97, you could do distributed compute, so my laptop could connect and they could use everyone's computer around the world to help find ET, to crunch these big numbers. It's finished now, but it still stands as one of the biggest repos out there. The data's all out there. You can access terabytes of data, the project code that they used, and the access to the papers that were published. So it's all open source, it's all free, and you can still contribute. And maybe you can change something. Maybe you can use one of your later ML algorithms and find something that they missed. I'll not go into this too much, but obviously the motherlode of open source science is code.nasa. It includes all of the IPs. I mean, the catalog is just endless. It's all free, it's all open source. You can go and check it out. So it's pretty cool. That's my own contribution. Okay, I'm going to break this up now to do a little bit of just fast tools, here's some cool stuff. So if you're looking at what I'm doing and you're like, man, I do not want to do what Adam's doing, that sucks, having to talk and be dry mouthed, you can get it done with an AI. So Synthesia.io will do the entire presentation for you. So you can write out the entire script and you pick the person and they'll do the presentation, and it's free for now. I don't know what use this has, but I just thought it was pretty cool. So you can put in it, you could type in a phrase and it will find a movie scene that will exactly match your phrase. Now, I think this might be useful because if you're a writer, I know if you're looking for inspiration, so you can probably put in that passage that you wrote, and then maybe you could explore tropes and things. But it's pretty cool. So you're going to see a theme here. I'm going to put all of the links at the top and you can check them out. If you like doing video editing and you're skint, then this is a good one because it's free. So you give it a video and you can remove the background. It's great for GIFs, right? But the thing is, be careful, because it's free, they have The Rock on their front page, and clearly they're not aware of potential lawsuits, right? So obviously The Rock isn't going to let them use him to advertise their brand, but the tool's free for now. Just don't use The Rock, okay? Because he won't be happy. Now, I don't know if you're going to hear this, and I don't know what the picture's there for, but this is a great one, fakeu.com. You can give it any text, and it will read it out in a celebrity's voice. So you could do an entire podcast with Samuel L. Jackson, right? So you literally can. So I don't know if you can hear this, but yeah, you can't hear it. But I had Samuel L. Jackson say, I really hate Zoom meetings. And so, yeah, you could do the entire thing, and it's free to go, and you can download the MP3. If you're into style and fashion and things, and you want to tailor clothes, this is the best one. So you can feed it all of your specifications if you want to make jeans or if you make a dress or something like that, and then it will then spit out the entire design and step-by-step instructions on how to do it. So that's a really cool tool. Earth 2050 is another good one. So this is Kaspersky, and it's kind of dystopian though. So it's yeah, you can basically have Google Earth, and then you can just see what London would look like and what New York would look like, and so you can actually zoom down and zoom out. And it's they have dystopian stories, in Beijing, there's a hacker and he's trying to steal people's brains and stuff. So it's it's kind of wacky but fun. It's a really good and it's backed by science apparently, right? So let's segue into something a bit more sort of serious, NHS. And I just want to share with you a mistake that I made. And I always like to share as many mistakes that I make because it's really important to learn from. When I was looking for medical stuff, I thought NHS, they have to be the leaders. And as I was looking, I found all of their stuff only was published up to 2020. And I was getting really triggered. I was that's when the pandemic started. And I was getting ready to do my tweet conspiracy, right? It turns out it was just on the wrong website. right? So it's if you want to check their stuff, it's Open Health Statistics, and man, is it big. And also, it turns out my neighbour works for the NHS and he works on the open source. So my neighbour really told me, and he's like, yeah, they're doing amazing things. But what they're also doing is you can go and check out these things and they'll tell you how they did it. So they'll say, like, if you want to build your own pipeline, do this. What I found interesting was that they have the same vision statement as NASA when it comes to open source. And that's pretty amazing. Word for word almost. So all code produced by NHS should be made publicly available. It's pretty much the same thing. Now, cynics might say, yeah, that's because it's taxpayers' dollars or money or pounds or whatever. But I still thought it was a really nice touch. However, if you're more interested in making money, then go to Clear Health, because they got bought over by Optum, and they got bought over 10 years ago. But what they did as a nice tribute is they left their entire designs and their blueprints, their code, even the business strategy, all left out. So you can actually follow the way that they were thinking. So if you're like an entrepreneur and you're trying to find that magic sauce, you can follow that step by step to the point that they got bought over. So you might be able to learn something from that. But ultimately, if you're interested in healthcare, there is only one stop shop. It's awesome healthcare. This has everything, literally everything. It's got, even in like the domain of COVID, you've got stuff where they're collecting metrics on vaccines, like how many times the van stopped when delivering like a crate of vaccines and how tainted they were. It's got full data that you can dig deep into that on like efficacy. It's got imaging, cancer research. It's got basically everything. And so if you've got any friends in the medical industry, like point them to this. It's actively maintained. So this is a gem. This is maintained by 23 people and is updated pretty much hourly, right? So really, I can't recommend that enough. So I have to plug some of my own stuff. I'm quite happy about this. So I've got 2 universities that's bought into this project. One's actually pushing it right now. So I built a glove which allows deaf-blind people to communicate. Because if you're deaf and blind, obviously it's hard, right? They've got no like the last technology was from IBM stuff back from 40, like nobody else has come into that space. And so they've not got a lot of options. So I'd built out, yeah, a little plug there. So I built out a glove which allows tactile feedback so that they can convert the tactile sensations and their hand movements into a language. And I built a language for that. But obviously I need help. I can't do that on my own, right? So it's why it's open source. So if you're interested in that, please come and see me after. I'd be really, really happy for anybody to help me out with that. Be really, really happy. And yeah, open source gaming, right? So this is why we're doing a whirlwind tour, right? Because it's not just medicine stuff. If you play games, you probably, like, if you play new games, one of the things you might be aware of, has anybody else felt the frustration of buying a new game and it's come out with all of the bugs, and then you have to wait a few months for them to patch it, right? With open source gaming, clearly it's different, right? Because the onus is on the community. If you don't like something, you just go and fix it. One of the other things, so Zero AD, that's one of the biggest open source games to date. One of the other beautiful things is it mirrors the crypto community quite nicely, because what happens is people will play an open source game that they love, and they're like, damn, this game's not what it used to be. So you can just roll back and fork off of that thing that it used to be that you loved and just take it for your own and build it out. Now, there's a game, I don't know, I'm not going to ask if you know the game. If you know the game, that's amazing. But No Man's Sky also had a similar issue. In the gaming industry, I'm representing myself here, so I'm speaking out of what I've seen in the industry, and the gaming industry is pretty horrible for devs. Yeah, it's quite a lot of abuse. Everybody in gaming will, especially at least AAA games, will tell you about the crunch. So they have a term in gaming called crunch, and it's like, yeah, it ruins people. With open source, you don't have that problem, right? You don't have dev hell. You don't have deadlines that you have to hit. And you don't have a disconnect with fans, so you don't have business pulling you away because they want you to release on a Wednesday. And you don't have death threats. Yeah, so that's really important to point out. So if anybody's a gamer, you probably heard of like No Man's Sky and Cyberpunk, and you'd be maybe a lot of people angry that those games were delayed. One of the reasons they were delayed was the developers were getting death threats and people were showing up at their door. So I'm not trying to say open source is a one-hit solution, but sometimes it's important to like cast sunlight onto the problem. If you're interested in engines, Godot is the way forward. So if you want to, like, if you're like, I want to build my own game engine and make money, then you can do that, and Godot's the way to do it. And I promised I'd make a plug for my friend, so he is using the open source engine to make this game. So if you like Diablo, then it's built in Godot, and you can check that out. And it's got like a crypto token kind of thing on it. It's not my thing, but if it's your thing, check it out. Now, open source data, like, I could just say Kaggle next, right? Like, if anybody's used Kaggle, you'll know. It's the go-to for data scientists, AI engineers, ML engineers. Here, it's basically like a global compendium of data sets and workbooks and code. So you can go here, you can compete, you can make money. So you can go in competitions, you can join in competition with me. Join with me, I'd love that. And we can go and compete, and you can solve real world problems, and there'll be companies there that will be pitching a problem that they've got. And they say, look, we need to do this. We've got this problem with renewable energy. We need to count emissions per million or something. And then you can go and work on that, and you can submit your notebooks, and whoever gets the closest will get the money. But sometimes they'll give money to runners up, like second, third place. It's really good. It's very competitive, but it's not elitist, right? So like, if you go to Kaggle/learn and you know nothing about data science, right? If you just go to this page and you invest about 2 months, you could probably bring yourself to at least lower intermediate level, but you really would have to invest the time, and it's all in this one place. So Kaggle is the de facto place for data science in open source space, but I would be remiss if I just moved on with that. So if, you know, at the risk of sounding too pro-science, like LIGO, gravity waves was yet another theoretical thing. When I was at university, we thought gravity waves were impossible. But the LIGO interferometer, they were able to get that data, and so that data is there for you to use. Like, they've open sourced that, and you can even get access to all of the publications, and you can email the engineers who made the breakthroughs. They have all of their contact data, because it's a geeky thing, right? So not many people are doing it. And that's my own thing. So I've got like analytics. So I've got a lot of bots, and they gather data all over the place. And I try to infer the news by what people are saying on social media. So you could be part of that as well if you want. So if anybody here's wanting to do a startup, or you've got your own you've got your own idea, and you're so focused on your value thing, your product, that you haven't really thought about what you're going to do when you get staff. Like, and I see that a lot. Like, I talk to a lot of CEOs, right? And the problem that CEOs have is like, Adam, we'd love you, but we don't have any money. So like, can we pay you in tokens? And I'm like, no, right? But I'll help them out where I can in an open source way. What this does is, if you're building your own company and you want to do, you don't have time to handle all of the HR stuff, but you also don't have the money to pay a company to outsource it for you, what you can do is you can use this Made Tech handbook, you can fork it, and it's got everything. So you can reshape it for your business needs. So it's got stuff like, you know, Friday drinks, it's got like your contracting, holidays, flexible working hours. It's even got like dismissal policy. It's got legislation. So like you can pivot the legislation based upon your nation as well, and your discipline. So that's a really great thing. The Made Tech handbook isn't the only one. It's just the one that I like to look at. I'm kind of closing up soon, so hopefully there were some interesting things, but it's not all pretty. Does anybody know Katakura, by the way? Is anybody aware of Katakura? Right, okay, so in the DevOps space, this was an absolute tragedy. What had happened was Katakura came out like 8 or 9 years ago, and it was amazing. It was like the Holy Grail. You could go on and you could spin up a Docker container or a pod without even making an account. And what happened, like, you could go on and run like infra on their estate, and then people were like sharing their servers. Like, oh, you can run pods on my server, no problem, and I can run pods on your server. And people were like just adding more and more. And it became the place where all DevOps engineers would go to learn hands-on. So like, rather than pay like a cloud guru money, you could go here and you could go from start to finish, like really hard stuff as well. Like, you'd be like Kubernetes networking stuff, right? Like really tricky stuff. But what happened was, O'Reilly, I'm not slagging them, but they came in and slowly their corporate tendrils got in the way, and then they, you could see from the beginning they were planning to, they brought it onto their own platform. The only thing that made me unhappy is they said, oh, we had to close this because people were mining crypto on the pods. And if anybody is decent in environments, you'll know that that would have been an easy fix. So the point is, I'm not attacking them, but you have to remember that all of these OS repos that I'm putting out there, I call it archaeology, but sometimes things get lost in the history and you just don't get access to them. So my advice is, if you see something that you like, fork it and say thank you, yeah, because it might be gone tomorrow. But Killer Code is the alternative, but they're a bit immature at the moment, but hopefully it will build up. Okay, I'm done. But I'm going to finish off with a bit of a childish thing, right? Because I thought this was so nice. Does anybody know what Kafka is? Okay, that's good. So at least it's kind of technical then. I didn't know what Kafka was until I came across this. I had the general idea, and I thought, okay, this is really condescending. This is super condescending. It's like a children's book. It's actually quite long. And you go through it, it's free, and you go through it and you talk about things really complicated things like topic coupling, and they've got the two otters holding hands and they're going down the stream, and the bees, I think the bees, they're trying to manage the network traffic, and then you've got streams, the otters are I want to send a message to my friend otter down that stream, so there's message queues and things, and it really quickly builds upon complexity. So this kind of echoes back to one of my final points of open source, which was the idea of making it accessible. The Einstein phrase that if you can't explain it to a 12-year-old, that you don't understand it yourself. I think all of these things that I've said, the way to culminate that moving forward is we kind of just need to be more open as people. Now, I'm not peddling this product because that new one is paid for. It's like rabbits and cryptography, so I think it's probably bunny rabbits sharing notes or something, but I'm not sure. But that's kind of the point I want to get across there, is I'm very, I'm glad that you put up with my anti-elitist rhetoric, and really thank you for hanging on with me to the end. So just a big thank you, and thanks for your time.